Sup y'all, D-Snods here, and welcome to Accelerating Global Change and Realignments. And in this video, we're going to look at this essential question: how did urbanization change after World War II? As seen in this concentric zone model, in the industrialized world, and especially in the United States, cities were highly concentrated around a single central business district, or CBD, the downtown financial and commercial district. Most people traveled within the city either on foot or by horse, keeping the cities more compact. Immediately outside the CBD was a zone of light and heavy industry. As one progressed away from the CBD and then the industrial zone of transition, the quality of homes went from very cheap and low quality to more expensive and higher quality. After the 1920s, railroads continued to expand and stimulate economic growth and migration through increased connectivity and accessibility. The internal structure of these cities was also adjusted, especially with the increased availability of electric trolleys and light rail systems that revolutionized travel within many cities. The urban pattern was altered as star patterns, or hub and spoke configurations, emerged, and streetcar suburbs, primarily connecting the wealthy, sprung up in the hinterlands. Real estate around passenger stations became more valuable and popular, especially for commercial interests. And zones of similar rent could extend from the CBD to the outer edge, for example with low rent areas as well as high rent areas. So that brings us to the multiple nuclei model, which was developed by Chauncey Harris and Edward Ullman around 1945. Now, they made the argument that neither of the previous two models were accurate, that the CBD was losing its dominant position as the nucleus of the urban area, and that several nodes of growth could be seen, which is why when you look at this model, which is not one that you would need to memorize in its shape or form, but you can see more of the disjointed nature of the city. The separate nuclei would become specialized, and they would not be located in any true relation to any distance attribute. Now, what made this possible? Not as much as geography, as much as technology.
Yes, I love technology, but not as much as you see. But I still love technology, always and forever.
What I'm talking about is the effect of the car, and obviously this is not just true in the United States, but car dependence has become a very key element of modern cities. As cars became more affordable and more commonplace, the city became more complex. A car is a comfortable place, much more comfortable than, let's say, an electric trolley or certainly going on a horse and wagon. And this made traveling less of a burden and led to greater commutes. As cities became more complex and transport technology improved and became more affordable, people were able to move further away from the cities where there was greater space and they were closer to amenities like parks or lakes. Now, suburbs are residential areas either existing as part of a city or as a separate residential community within commuting distance of a city. This era improved and expanded travel on the ground, sea, and air between cities greatly as well. This improved even more so with the establishment of highways such as the famous Route 66, also known as the Mother Road, that went from Chicago, Illinois to the U.S. heartland and ending in Santa Monica, California. Then, in 1956, with the passage of the Interstate Highway System under President Eisenhower, an organized network of roadways connected cities and people across the U.S. as never before. It also had the effect of bypassing certain towns and stops along some parts of the original routes, resulting in their decline, as seen with this abandoned gas station in New Mexico, along the original Route 66 highway. While suburbanization predated the World War era, the middle and upper class migration away from the central cities accelerated greatly in the post-World War II years. One of the most iconic examples of this was the establishment of Levitt towns, named after the owner of the company that produced them. They were large suburban developments created for returning veterans and their families. However, they were limited to those of the Caucasian race. At that time, mixed neighborhoods were even less popular than today. The communities offered attractive alternatives to the cramped central city locations and apartments. The first was built in New York, and the second in Pennsylvania. Through the GI Bill, GI means General Infantry, qualified vets returning from World War II received money towards education, starting a business, or received housing assistance, which greatly led to increased suburbanization. Follow this with the economic boom of the 1950s, especially in the areas of manufacturing, the emergence of the Eisenhower highway system, And couple all this with inexpensive gasoline that was mostly produced domestically, and the suburbs became a distinct American phenomenon. Today, most urban areas have distinct ethnic neighborhoods. However, this was not always the case. In the post-World War II era, suburbanization remained a largely white phenomenon. But even before Levittowns and other suburban areas were propping up, African Americans and their families had been moving northward and westward from the South for decades, through what had been called the Great Migrations. A practice that was utilized by banks and homeowner loan corporations was redlining, in which they would often mark a red line on a map to delineate areas where they would not offer a mortgage or a loan. The term refers to discrimination against a group of people, often by race or sex. Other services were sometimes also denied, based on race, such as the access to insurance, healthcare, some businesses, or even jobs. Another nefarious practice was blockbusting, utilized by some U.S. realtors and developers to encourage whites to sell their houses at a loss. In some instances, the realtor would sell a home or series of homes to racial minorities, such as blacks or Hispanics, and imply to the white homeowners that the real estate property values were declining in their previously racially segregated neighborhood. Some whites sold their homes due to racist inclinations, however, others left to protect their investments. Regardless, turnover would increase, and the realtor would make more money off commission, while the companies would rake in even more profits. While suburbanization is not uniquely an American phenomenon, most other cities found in the core and richer semi-peripheral states tend to be more compact and less sprawled. Because more of the upper and middle class has remained in the urban areas, the Canadian inner cities have experienced far less dilapidation. In fact, most of their city centers contain many of the wealthiest populations, keeping the cityscape cleaner and less blighted due to the higher tax base and the wealthy investing more in their own neighborhoods. As has been the case with Canadian cities remaining fairly compact, the same has largely held true with the vast majority of Western and Northern European cities. Most cities in Europe are much older than any found in the Americas, and these old city centers were pre-industrial, constructed through the accretion of winding roads and buildings, seldom with any strict planning in mind. The central governments have had more influence on urban planning than in the United States, and they have made efforts to restrict outward growth. One way this has been done is through the use of greenbelts, or land surrounding urban areas designated to remain undeveloped or retained as agricultural land. You can see this map of greenbelts in England, and this larger scale map shows the greenbelt around London. This map of Glasgow, Scotland shows how wealthy Europeans tend to live in or close to the city centers. Gasoline prices in Europe are sometimes 3 to 4 times more expensive than in the United States. As a result, Europeans utilize public transport more than most US Americans. We'll take a quick look at Eastern Europe, which tends to be less affluent than their Western counterparts. This is largely because they were built up while under the influence of communism and strict central government planning. Many of these cities have microdistricts, which are residential zones flanked by public buildings. They have no true CBDs.
Now let's get down to brass tacks here.
Looking at this graph showing the density profile of New York City, you can see how the density dips around the main CBD, which is downtown Manhattan. Just outside the main CBD is usually the most dense urban area, with multi-story apartments and fewer businesses. Many lower-income service jobs can be found in the CBD, and so the lower-skilled workers are close by due to cost and convenience. Since New York City is an enormous megacity within the United States, many other boroughs surround it, places such as Brooklyn and Queens. So their major CBDs exhibit greater density as well. Further out, as more space is available and the bid rent declines, more families can afford homes. And even further out, you typically find even nicer homes in the suburbs. And you can see many other cities exhibit similar density profiles, especially those in the MDCs. These cities follow the basic human patterns predicted by bid rent theory. However, it doesn't work for all cities. Moscow, for example, was a city that was largely built up during the Soviet communist era. So the government was exclusively responsible for urban planning, and the free market principles that allow people to make their own choices were not in play. Looking at the classic concentric ring model based on the United States, you can see the CBD at the center with the industrial zone just outside. then followed by residential zones starting with the lower income population and proceeding outward to the medium income and finally the higher income earners. Compare that with this portrayal of the general urban layout in the majority of cities in the developing world. Since cities in these countries didn't experience much industrialization in the earliest 20th century, they did not establish much infrastructure to accommodate transport technology like streetcars or even automobiles. And as a result of this, the wealthier residents remained closer to the CBD and the central city. This trend has largely remained consistent in modern times. Further out, the medium income earners reside, and the poorest remain on the periphery, with industry building up on the outskirts of the city where land is affordable and the unskilled workers are close by. In some of the regions developing the fastest, new suburbs have been forming further out as well. Along the outskirts of the city lies a zone of peripheral squatter settlements, which sharply contrast with the affluent and comfortable suburbs that ring cities in the US. This zone is often a large and encircling land that is home for impoverished and unskilled workers, who are usually there due to the influx of intra-regional migrants, predominantly moving from rural to urban areas. Whether these zones are referred to as shanty towns, slums, Mexican barrios, Brazilian favelas, or the like, the homes are often built from scavenged materials. The streets are unpaved, there is little sanitation, if any. Often there are open trenches of waste. Residents carry water from long distances. Of course, shanty towns are by no means confined to the Latin American cities. Just look at the vast slums around many South Asian cities, such as Mumbai, Karachi, and Dhaka.
That is correct.